The Vietnam War began on November 1st, 1955, when fighting broke out between the northern and southern halves of Vietnam. Larger nations began to take sides. The United States and the anti-communist nations allied with the South, while the communist nations allied with the North. The United States used the domino theory to justify preventing every attempt by communist nations to expand their influence. However, the U.S. eventually withdrew because of political pressure both from other non-communist nations and from the public. Randy Hunt enlisted in the Army as an electrical engineer and was deployed to an airbase near Da Nang, Vietnam, in 1971, 2 years before the United States withdrew from the war. Once there, Randy Hunt repaired F-4 fighter bombers for 12 months, living at the Air Force Base just outside Da Nang. He was then sent to Ubon, Thailand, to again work on planes that were to be used in the Vietnam War. After his time in Thailand, his deployment was complete and he returned home.
I joined the Air Force in 1970. Prior to that, I was going to college, and I felt like I needed some excitement in my life, I guess, so I decided to stop college at that point, and I joined the Air Force. During that period of time, the government had the military draft, and everybody 18 and over within a particular age range were given a draft number, I guess, and a rating. And you had exemptions if you were going to college. You were exempt from the draft. However, the first draft rating I had was 1A, even though I was going full-time to college, and I was going to get that changed, but I decided I was going to go into the service anyway, so I volunteered to join the Air Force. I joined the Air Force to see the world. Thought that'd be exciting. My first place I was stationed after basic training was in Tampa, Florida, and I proceeded from there is where I eventually was sent to Da Nang, Vietnam for 1 year. Being in the Air Force and knowing I was going to an air base at Da Nang, I felt it was probably relatively safe for me, so I wasn't scared in that respect, but I guess I was a little bit excited for the adventure part of it, but that changed over time after I got there from some of the experiences. It's kind of memorable in a way, but after getting there, there was you were given the introductory part. You're essentially, in my case, you're essentially kind of alone, without friends, and you're trying to make friends, but you're given the preliminaries for living on the base and things to watch out for, the security. Da Nang had a reputation of being they call it Rocket City. It had a reputation of being hit by rockets quite often. And being an Air Force base, we weren't subjected to, at that period of time, ground attacks by the enemy forces, the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese. They were really outside of that area, but we were subject to rocket attacks from I think they were from the Viet Cong, probably in the mountains that surrounded the air base. And this happened quite often, but it gained a reputation. That's why they call it Rocket City. So we knew about that going in, and it was, it's kind of a scary thing to think about. And the first time it happened, that was the first time that I realized that there's somebody out there trying to hurt me. The war part of it. Prior to that, it was kind of an adventure. We had a warning when the rocket attacks were going to happen, and that it probably was for about maybe 15 seconds. It's kind of interesting, the security around the perimeter of the base, they would see the flashes of the rockets taking off in the mountains, and they would holler on the radios, rockets, rockets, rockets. And the siren would start coming up, and before the siren got up to full speed, the rockets would hit. So you had about that much warning, essentially nothing. So they had bunkers throughout the base that we could use, but you didn't have time to get to bunkers. So it was part of the, part of the introduction. They told us, when you hear the siren, don't run, just hit the ground, stay where you're at. So that was kind of exciting, all those times it happened. So you end up laying around. I saw one particular case where I saw an airplane get hit by a rocket. I worked nights the whole time I was there, 12 hours at night, and the rocket attacks occurred during the evening hours. And on one occasion I saw a EC-47 get hit by a rocket directly on the other side of the base, and a lot of fireworks. Another case, rocket hit a JP4 fuel line that ran above ground. It wasn't too far from where myself and another gentleman were in a truck, and it caught fire. And one other occasion, we were working on the flight line, and a fuel truck got hit by a rocket. And that was quite spectacular. The guy had just left the truck parked and gone to chow, so he wasn't in it, but it was quite exciting. We were all taking part in moving airplanes after that, and to move airplanes out of the way of the fire. So, kind of interesting. Well, yeah, it took the feeling of adventure away, and there was a lot of anxiety after that. I guess I was scared, so it's always in your mind, but you have to continue your work. We worked, like I said, 12 hours a shift, and we worked on airplanes and fixed all the problems at night so they could fly during the next day. This was just day after day after day. It was like a manufacturing environment in a way, but you're manufacturing airplanes, to go to war. It was just a continuous process, so that process kind of took your mind off of what could happen to you, You don't think of war being that way, but that particular war had gone on so long, and it's not like troops in the field taking ground and moving forward. This was it was interesting. It was like a job, and that's what was kind of interesting about it. It was, like I said, day after day, you're fixing planes, they're flying, fixing planes, and they're flying. And when you're, in my case, when I was going to be there 1 year, and everybody at that time was 1 year. Once your 365th day is up, you go home. Somebody comes and takes your place. And I was also allowed, during that period of time, there was rest and recuperation period. You get 2 weeks. And during the start of the war, they were allowed to go to Hawaii and maybe Australia, other countries, to just take 2 weeks off, and you could meet your family there and then come back to the war. There at the later years, and in my case, I was able to come home for 2 weeks on vacation, I guess you could call it that, and then turn around and go right back to war. Mm-hmm. That's kind of strange when you think about it, There was conscientious objectors. We had one in our unit. He didn't want to, not that he was directly shooting or killing anybody, but he didn't want to work on anything that did. So they allowed him just to stay in the shop and not go out and work on planes. But there was nobody ever said anything bad against me. He ended up being a little bit of a loner because of that, and I didn't interact with him too much because you wondered what the process he went through to be that a conscientious objector. And it wasn't the fact that he just said he was. There was ramifications for him being that way, and I don't know what kind of legal things he went through or what kind of counseling or anything. So I myself probably tended to avoid him, because you don't know what associations might, with him might have on you. So, and he probably felt that way a little bit. I actually knew the gentleman in Tampa, and he was a very intelligent person, and I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. In the evening, there was a gentleman that came around selling sandwiches on like a little moped. Call him the sandwich guy, and it could have been Water Buffalo, I don't know, but they were good sandwiches. And you would see there was a group that they were Air Force, Vietnamese Air Force, and they were side by side, essentially with us. They had a section of the flight line where their planes were, and they were separated from ours. But you would see them working, but we didn't mingle with them. They were kind of kept separate, So, and during that time, we weren't allowed to go off base to go downtown. Some small interactions. When I had a picture painted by a gentleman that came to the barracks selling his skills. It was a picture. It ended up being myself and my wife, but he took a Polaroid picture of me, and then I had an 8x10 picture of my wife. And, the last 30 days I was supposed to be in Vietnam. We were supposed to be there for 365 days, but the base was winding down and closing down, so they were sending everybody to other bases. I got sent to Ubon, Thailand, but I thought I was going to get sent home early, but that didn't happen. So I got sent to Ubon, Thailand for 30 days, and that was a little bit of a wind down after being in Vietnam. They were still sending airplanes from Thailand bases to North Vietnam and parts of South Vietnam doing bombing. So, but it wasn't we weren't getting rocket attacks, so that was good. But when I returned home, that was 1972. Sent to my next station. I was still obligated for 2 more years in the service, so I got sent to Omaha, Nebraska, Offutt Air Force Base, and the war's still going on at that time because I don't think it ended until '75. But I had done my year. There wasn't any possibility that me being sent back. So during that, it was essentially forgotten. It was taking place, but I knew I wouldn't have to go back. But I eventually got sent on a 6-month temporary duty to Guam from Nebraska because we were still bombing North Vietnam at the time. And, majority of our B-52 bombers were on Guam, and they were running, flying out of Guam and making bomb runs over North Vietnam. So I got pulled back into it for 6 months. I was living in a tent there. That was worse than it was when I was in Vietnam. I was in a wooden barracks in Vietnam. The first day I was in Thailand, at that base, I was going to the post office, and I heard somebody holler, "Hey, Randy." I looked around. I was walking across this field, and it was a high school buddy of mine that we were very good friends there. Just before I went into service, we had lost contact with each other. I did not know he was in the service, and there he was in Ubon, Thailand, and our paths crossed on that field, and that made that period, kind of enjoyable in a way because we reminisced a lot. He worked for the Armed Forces Thailand Network. He was a disc jockey and anchor for the news show, and had a really neat job being in the service. So, on an F-4 fighter, the generator was on the very nose of the engine. There was 2 of them. We'd have to crawl down the intake to connect and disconnect the generator leads on there. So it was, if you're claustrophobic, that might bother you a little bit. Kind of interesting. Typically on an F-4, you see bombs underneath the wings on the bomb racks. Yeah, I don't know the different sizes, but we'd see them all the time. But toward the end of my tour there, I started seeing them with extra fins on the back and what ends up being an infrared detector on the front, and they were laser-guided bombs. And we didn't see those at the beginning, but we were seeing those toward the end. And also there were some that were TV-guided. The rear guy, the jib they call him, guy in back, he had a little Sony TV that he would use to guide the bombs. They had a TV camera in the nose, and started seeing some of those. So I don't think they're like the laser-guided bombs now. Back then they probably weren't guided as much. They were. It went from regular incandescent kinds of lights, and some of the planes went to something called electroluminous, which is like illuminated strips. There was not anything negative to me being, and I'll attach being in the war and being in the service as being the same thing. There was I was in the service for 4 years. I was only over there for a year, but there was the positive things was, and one of them, I had the GI Bill when I got out, so I had money to go to college, and you're giving veterans preference when you go to look for employment, and you're given preference if you were a Vietnam era veteran. So those are all positive things, equal skills. You had the preference for the job, and employers at that time they honored that preference, and it was good. I'm sure there's things like that now also, but.